Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the Tech Podcast series. This is Lakshit Pant from Azure Developer Community, and today we are here to explore the landscape of cybersecurity, cyber threats, and all the fascinating roles of maybe the latest tech advancement that we see in this digital age. Today, we have the privilege of delving into this, the world of ransomware, threat attack actors, and the changing dynamics of cybercrime. And we are joined by a true expert of the field and someone who brings really a wealth of knowledge and insights into the cybercrime field, right? So we have Mr. Raj Sivaraju, President of APAC Arete here. So, sir, if you could give a little bit introduction yourself to kick off the podcast.
Absolutely. Lakshit, I am from a company called Arete IR. We are a digital forensics and incident response company. Started in the US in 2018, and today we are in about 4 different countries in US, Canada, UK, and India. And so far, we've handled more than 7,000 ransomware, predominantly ransomware cases, amongst other cases. So we have built a wealth of knowledge from each and every case that we have been working on. We
Okay.
have a very long and abundance of data that we have collected from each and every case. So we do believe that today we have gathered a lot of intel that can give us a lot of insights into how these ransomware syndicates are working and what they're looking at and how are they able to extort the amounts that they are able to extort. So more than happy to share all of those insights with you and your listeners.
Yeah, a pleasure hearing all those. So just a quick follow-up question, if I say, so are these all kind of resources or maybe some kind of services that you provide, or is this more of a kind of like a consulting role services that you provide to all the customers that you work with?
That's a very good question, Nakshit. So we do provide reactive services to begin with. As in,
Okay.
anytime a company gets impacted due to cyber attack, and when they do see that their businesses have been impacted, they do reach out to their insurance carriers first, and or the cyber wing of the authorities, and we are the first line of defense for them. So through the insurance carriers and sometimes through cyber authorities, we get reached, and we help each of these companies that might have been impacted due to cyber attacks.
Okay. So to start, if you could highlight a little bit, maybe in some prevalent ransomware strains that we watch today, and that what are their distinguishing characteristics, or maybe I could say the methods of attacks. If you could explain a little bit about those.
Absolutely. Lakshit, I'm going to start with the trends that we are seeing. I think that that's very, very important
Right.
because those trends will give us a lot of insight into what's happening today, right?
Right.
Um, Arete, as a company, we've been observing that the first half of 2023, there have been real significant changes in the ways that the threat actors have been operating. The overall threat landscape is changing. Incident response engagements, particularly data highlights a lot of fluctuations in the way these threat actors have starting to react and act on with the impacted companies. Why do I say that? We are starting to see that there are notable trends in ransomware demands and payments that are being observed, reflecting a lot of changes in the attackers' TTPs, as
Okay.
in their strategies and how the victims are also starting to respond. In some situations, we are seeing a lot of positive data, and in some situations, it is not as so positive. The reason I say that is when we see how the victims are reacting to these incidents, we are starting to see an upward trajectory of better cyber security implementations in the victims.
Okay.
That's an upward trend, but still there's so much more that needs to be done to
Hmm.
be able to safeguard ourselves on a regular basis. We are also starting to see in the different trends that we're seeing industries that were being impacted. In the last few years, majority of the industries that were being impacted were coming from the manufacturing. They were coming from healthcare, Last year, and particularly first half of this year, we're starting to see that the professional services companies have been impacted and targeted largely.
Okay.
We are starting to see that, particularly the report that we have published recently, it also highlights a lot of the, it actually hints at potential future developments based on the trends that we are starting to observe. And Arite identifies a recurring pattern of action and reactions within cybersecurity. What it means is, over the past few years, high profile attacks have prompted organizations to invest heavily in security tools. To me, that's a positive trend. And the good part, Lakshya, that we are starting to see is it's not just about investment in tools, but a lot of companies are taking a lot of good interest in training their own people. The weakest link is our each and every employee. So if the
Right.
employees aren't fully trained and fully aware of the potential risks that they have at their own hand, then we are only as strong as they are, right? So we're starting to see companies really invest very heavily on trainings as well. So which has been a very, very good on positive change. There's been a remarkable increase in collaboration between the law enforcement agencies and civil cybersecurity organizations. What
Okay.
does that mean? That means that companies like ourselves and many others, we're starting to share a lot of information that we are gathering through cybersecurity, through incidents like, ransomware incidents or business email compromises, extortions. We're starting to collect a lot of data, and we're sharing that data with the law enforcement to only strengthen the entire posture at a overall macro level as well as micro level. So these are some of the trends that we are seeing in the overall threat landscape, particularly in ransomware, because what we have observed is, in amongst the different attacks, over 78% of them are ransomware attacks, and therefore there's a lot of focus on ransomware at large.
Okay, so you have specified some of the major industries. I just wanted to know why so. Like you have given a name of healthcare industries, right? So why healthcare? Why all these cyber attackers? Are their systems, maybe the architecture is very vulnerable, or what's happening exactly happening inside?
If you really look at, say, last 10 plus years, how insurance has moved, it's
Okay,
very interesting, right? Our healthcare as a industry, as the insurance started to come and insure and provide insurance for healthcare, the number of diagnostic centers have also gone up because
right.
people have started using what they're paying for and taking
Hmm.
advantage of it, which is a good thing.
Right.
Likewise, when you look at cyber security and cyber attacks, it's unfortunate, but the reality is, as you see how the cyber insurance is progressing, the threat actors are following that trend. So there was, if you follow the different industries that have been adopting cyber insurance, you'll start to see that threat actors are also starting to target those because there is some level of assurance that they get that there's a high potential that they will receive the money because
Okay.
they're backed by the insurance carriers. So last year, we have particularly Luna Moth, that happens to be one variant, which has been impacting a lot of the professional services organizations. And the variant itself has been fairly successful because they've discovered themselves every single time, and so they were able to be successful to a large extent. So
Right.
industries, the reason why different industries get impacted is because, a the security in those industries are not as stringent, not pushed by statutory requirements, and most
Okay.
importantly, investments weren't made. And
Yeah.
to cover or top it all, insurance doesn't cover them. Now that we see those trends, insurance is starting to cover. Still, the security, strengthening has not really caught up.
So, in the previous statement, you have mentioned about training people inside the organization to to prevent all the cyber attacks and ransomware attacks. And I just got remembered one statement that has been made by a similar podcast that I was doing with a cybersecurity expert, and he mentioned very fine line. That stuck to my mind specifically, that he said all these cyber attacks happen not because of the poor architecture. All these attacks happens just because a person sitting behind those architectures, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, so people are not, so everyone, every time, whenever we see a ransomware attack or something like this, there is someone who is sharing that OTP or some kind of message or clicking on some spam link, right? So these are something. So now, taking this podcast a little bit ahead, let's delve into the a new term that has been introduced, that is cybercrime as a service, that is CAAS. So what
Yes.
exactly it is, and I'm very curious. Like I'm pretty much exploring the cloud part. There are multiple services that I've been exploring, SaaS, PaaS, IS, all these things. But this is has been a very new term for me as well. How does it maybe impact the broader threat landscape?
In 2019 and 2020 is where we've started to see this emerging trend of ransomware as service. 2021, 22 have been where a lot of these syndicates are starting to really evolve as very interesting, but realities as organizations that are really thriving under this. Now, ransomware as a service was started, and as I said, in 2019, where a syndicate was approached and can be approached by any individual who's got access to the dark web and starting to say, "Hey, I need the software that I could use a targeted attack on." And when you
Okay.
do something like that, these guys, when they go, they give do a profit sharing kind of model, where they're saying if you get this benefit out of it, there's a certain percentage you have to give us, and then certain percentage you can keep.
Right.
So that has been evolving. And 2021, 22, this we saw a huge rise in those services. A lot of companies have started to, a lot of individuals, let alone syndicates, but individuals started to leverage that kind of a model. Now, what we have also seen is 2023, we're starting to see the downtrend in that, because these syndicates, they're starting to make so many benefits out of it that it started to dilute the entire model. So they are getting a lot of these individuals coming in and misusing even those. When I say misuse, it's an interesting case, and I'd love to share this anecdote with you
Sure.
from our experiences. So there
Sure.
was this company that got impacted. Our teams got involved. We have a very highly trained experts who sit and negotiate with these ransomers in case when situations do not enable us to restore services for the company, and because of bad backups or because of the infrastructure that the company currently had, and maybe because of their investments that they could not make on security, as a last resort, the company and the insurance carriers request us to facilitate these negotiations. So we have experts who actually sit and negotiate with these ransomers. So in one such case, we negotiated, and then we were able to bring the ransom demand down by almost about 40+%. So we paid off the ransom in crypto, but the ransomer actually renegotiated. So
Okay.
instead of giving us the keys, he said, "Listen, I told you I will give you the keys, but unfortunately, I have my kids that I need to send to tuition and colleges and all that, so I need more money."
Okay.
And our experts, as I said, we've got really, really big, strong experts in here. Because of that expertise, we were able to reach out to the syndicate leaders, and we shared this current situation. The syndicate leaders actually got involved. They gave us the keys, and they kicked this particular threat actor out of their syndicate once and for all.
Okay. That's
So
nice.
we got the keys without having to pay a single dime.
That's nice. Yeah.
It's an interesting story, only because a lot of this is, while it's very criminal in every sense of the word, but
Right.
it is very commercial as well. And
Hmm.
fortunately, there are certain ethics that they follow in this very unethical, industry.
So definitely they try to grab a, maybe they try to stole a person that this doesn't require, right? So in recent times we have been seeing all the LLMs and all the AI has been revolutionizing various industries. And if you could elaborate on any role of AI, including all these, maybe if I'm just mentioning one name, GPT one, right? In the world of cybercrime, how has the model has been changed in the cybercrime world? I believe the threat has been maybe increased a little bit more, because now the responsible AI, and there are multiple things that as people are introducing right now. But I don't think that all these standards really match the current major industry standards, right? So, what are your thoughts upon this, sir?
Absolutely. Before we get to the AI part, some of the very interesting, trends that we should talk about as a service, because that really leads into the AI part, is we are starting to see that post exploitation, the command and control frameworks were acquired by the network management. So, what happens is they're starting to strengthen after every attack. The companies only then they realize and start to put in a lot of the new infrastructure coming into the to
Right.
help their strengthen their infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because of that, there are a lot of this AI, starting to lot of the threat actors were forced to get into newer technologies. So there's a trend, right? There's number of companies that were impacted are larger. So because of that, the word is getting around, and therefore the investments in security went on going up. And because of the latest technologies, which again, like for example, there are a lot of these EDRs that are AI driven EDRs. And so to counter those, the threat actors are starting to use AI as their platform as well. So ChatGPT, by and large, generates human-like responses from a different data set of conversations. So when
Mhm.
you use that as a baseline, again, this was something, I think it was launched in January 2023. It gained a lot of global attention,
Mhm.
offering both free and paid, versions of different ransomware variants. Now there
Mhm.
were filters aimed to prevent harmful content that were at least being implemented by a lot of these companies, which were again breached. So users are finding ways to bypass and exploit all of these different AI filters that were put in place, used by threat actors from different vulnerabilities, and generated a lot of this malware code, which again, using the AI tools and seeing what is already implemented, they were able to generate on demand newer kind of code that can exploit what has already been implemented. So these are some of the, again, one of the very interesting was the underground forums. Now, this is like what you've just said, there are a lot of these forums for coders and developers. Likewise, there are a lot of these underground forums that the threat actors use. The
Okay.
underground forums discuss a lot of the chat GPT's role in cybercrime, and they include a lot of the code, creations for malware. So they've shared a lot of these different types of codes that they may have come up with. Something called the worm GPT, as a term. I don't know if you've heard, but that is starting to emerge and become very prevalent in our industry. The Worm GPT, a malicious version of the same Chat GPT. Again, this is something that came up as recently as I think 13th or 14th of July 2023. This was an interesting evolution from Chat GPT. It's funny how they used similar branding as well, right? They said like Worm GPT, just to make sure that they're so blatant about it, right? So
Right.
which again, this is a tool that actually generates phishing emails, malware codes, fake news, and social media posts. This is the whole thing is built on the GPT slash J framework. It creates texts in various languages, codes, and creates a lot of these snippets on the fly. So this was designed specifically for cybercrime. Lacks any of the ethical constraints that we usually would see in the other forum forums, and does respond to harmful requests. So these are some of those trends that we're starting to see, where these worm GPTs or the AI based ransomware tools, they're starting to pose serious risks for online security, privacy, and starting to become potential scams for online. So there's a lot of increasing functionality of AI software that's allowing threat actors to leverage AI for cyber attacks.
Well, at its
You
power.
would, your
Yeah.
your question was about the attack surface and how is it really impacting the overall industry. I think it's a very pertinent question. What Arite is seeing is these ransom groups, are diversifying their targets beyond your regular traditional Windows systems. So usually,
Okay.
majority of the trends that we've seen the last 3 to 5 years, predominantly they were Windows systems, and now we're starting to see that there's a huge diversification. They're not just focused on Windows because it's become way too easy, and so they are looking at various other areas as well. There's definitely an
Okay.
increased focus on Mac OS because a lot of again there's high adoption. Mac OS was limited for individual users and maybe in one or two industries in the past. Now Mac OS has become prevalent in many other industries already. It's been used at a commercial level, at a corporate level, and therefore, even the threat actors are starting to invest on the Mac OS. Linux is another area that they are trying to really, invest on and build a lot of these tools that can penetrate these infrastructures as well. This diversification really extends the potential attack surface, and most importantly, what it also does is increase the overall pool of attackers, that the potential attackers, as we say, right? So ransomware
Right.
attackers starting to, and again, they are increasing their entire pool, so that again, most of the time, it's not guaranteed that the victim will pay up, and therefore they have a very wide net that they would cast. And that's why they like increasing the overall victim pool. At the same time, ransomware attackers are also exploiting the misconfiguration. A lot of the OSs are being built in such high speed just to keep up with the competition, that there are a lot of these times they're leaving these weaknesses online. So the misconfigurations or weak access controls in the cloud settings, these are areas that are getting exploited heavily. And particularly with the new technologies like the 5Gs and the edge computing, cloud coming in, these infrastructures and these new technologies, because they're brand new and not fully tested or not fully developed, they do come with their own inherent vulnerabilities that they have. And so
Yeah.
the threat actors are starting to exploit those vulnerabilities, you know I would say fairly easily, just because of the number of incidents that we are starting to see. There's a huge necessity for us to proactively, create a lot of these measures to increase a lot of these cybersecurity postures and strengthen our postures in around these new technologies. That's the only way we can counter what's happening today in the industry.
Right. And after listening to a lots of things that you have already told, I'm wondering, right, what it looks like to negotiate with all those ransomware attackers and how this looks like. So just by with your experience, you could explain it, like if you could throw some light on this.
Lakshit, I and my partner, we always say that we are not an IT company. We are,
Okay.
yes, our core is a cybersecurity company, but we are in the business of saving lives and livelihoods.
Okay.
Because
Nice.
you can only imagine the amount of concern, frustration the victims would usually get into when they realize that their company has been impacted.
Exactly.
Suddenly, a well-run business, they're down on their knees, they're in dead waters, as we say, where their entire infrastructure is totally inaccessible. So
Hmm.
it's a lot of times it's beyond comprehension for any of these different corporates and business owners, and individuals, because nobody can prepare them, where suddenly the entire infrastructure goes down and it becomes inaccessible. So there was this
Right.
one example I'd like to cite. In 2021, I believe, there, December 31st, at about 5 o'clock in the evening, we receive a call from one of our insurance partners, and they said, "Hey, there's a hospital that got impacted." Now, it's a,
Oh,
hospital is a fairly common thing around that time because healthcare was getting impacted. But when we immediately reacted, we had boots on the ground within few hours. What we realized is this hospital was a oncology hospital for children. They had
okay.
hundreds of children who were cancer patients, and their entire appointment system was down, their prescription systems were down, their billing system was down, the doctors, their notes systems, everything was down. Lakshit, you can only imagine what would have
The
been the situation for an organization like that, which is taking care of young children who've been impacted with this deadly disease.
right. Yeah.
Now, this is just one example that we have, but there are so many examples where we as an organization, yes, we provide a lot of our services around computers, but the reality is we are in a business of saving lives and livelihoods.
That's a very fine statement that you made, sir, and I really believe that's a reality of our industry, that you are saving lives and livelihood of all the organizations that are working in this industry. So, as we have seen, how geopolitical conflicts like Russia-Ukraine war, I just like to a little bit throw about this, can influence cyber attack. Can you discuss the potential connection between such conflicts and the cybercrime?
Absolutely. Um, if you all remember, the Ukraine war started, I think, in 2022 towards, I would say, March kind of time frame.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
what this actually happened was the Ukraine conflict, had a major impact on the cyber attacks, that we have seen. The war led to a massive exodus of these different threat actors, avoiding any of this, avoiding any kind of vision from the law authorities. Their relocation actually fueled by available funds, likely get contributed to be observed and decrease in the ransomware attack. So a lot of these sanctions that were pushed on Russia, it made it made it very difficult for the threat actors, and therefore we are starting to see that the threat actors are starting to move away from the location that we erstwhile knew they were potential. Again, it's very difficult to pinpoint any of these locations, but based on certain parameters and then the amount of data that we collect, including the language they use, the extortionists, the kind of language they use, the words they use. We try to use that to attribute to a particular location. And usually that sort of would pinpoint to, at least Russia is large, but different few locations within Russia. And the Ukraine war, because of the kind of sanctions the entire world is really levied on Russia, we're starting to see that the threat access starting to disperse off. It is no more as free haven for the threat actors as it was in the past. Russia hackers also face a lot of uncertainty because the kind of economic strain that they are seeing in Russia, it is making their overall infrastructure unsustainable. And though
okay.
we are starting to see that there's a huge exodus, and it's actually enabling the international law enforcement to at least try and apprehend some of these hackers now, or at least disrupt these cyber criminal networks. Consequently, many groups have actually restructured. They've broken down into smaller groups. They're starting to rebrand. So,
Okay.
if your question is, how did the Russia-Ukraine war really affect this
Exactly.
entire
Yeah.
industry. I think it impacted in two ways. One, it diluted a lot of the infrastructure that was put in place. Diluted
Okay.
because they had to move it geographically to different locations,
Right.
and it actually broke down a lot of these syndicates into smaller bits and pieces. We are starting to see major shifts towards compartmentalized operations, which actually improves the resilience, but definitely hampers the coordinated attacks that these guys were having. It could definitely slow some of the innovation for them, and so there definitely is a negative impact on the threat actors community as well.
Right. So now, sir, as we look into the future, what advice would you give to all the individuals out there and organization looking to, strengthen their cybersecurity posture in the, if you could say, the face of evolving cyber threats?
I think it's high time that we realize the fact that cyber attacks are never a matter of if, it's only a matter of when. The
Hmm.
reason I say that is, again, every company can become a potential target for these threat actors, and therefore every company should and must invest in strengthening their security posture, and their investment should be at multiple levels. One, technology. They have to invest heavily on technology to make sure that their infrastructure is secure. They should upgrade their technologies. I still have seen large corporates, and you cannot even imagine some of the brands that we've seen where very, very, profitable organizations still surviving on way old technology and infrastructure. And so it's important that the board of directors, they start realizing the fact that cybersecurity is an imminent threat, and so they have to invest in infrastructure. They need to upgrade them in a timely fashion, and keep upgrading them. It's a continuous process. It's not a one-time thing. At the same time, processes, the entire cybersecurity community, the CISO offices are a must in every single organization. CISOs are people who are there to safeguard your organizations from an absolute eventuality, and therefore investing on CISOs is absolutely critical. And third are people. We have to invest on training our people, and that too, like what we've done for fire safety. When you have drills every, once in a quarter or once in 6 months, even cybersecurity tabletop exercises and drills are a must. They should
Right.
happen. We should simulate those. We should simulate, cyber attacks, and we should continuously do some of the red teaming as much as possible, so that the corporates are always on their toes and safeguarding themselves.
Right. And with that, to all our dear listeners, bring us to the end of this another episode of the Tech Podcast series. And I hope everyone found this discussion with Mr. Shiviraj enlightening as I did, and our exploration into the world of cybersecurity, cyber threats, and all the ransomware, threats that Sir has mentioned has been eye-opening. And a big thank you to you, sir, for joining us for this
Absolutely.
podcast and sharing your expertise and insights with us, sir. And absolutely looking forward to hosting you in the future and looking forward to learn from your experience, sir.
Thank you, Lakshit. And again, this is a very important topic. I'm very, very glad that you are on it. And I would encourage many of your listeners to start looking at cybersecurity as an imminent threat. And so they should focus on it, every individual. And again, it's not just corporates, even individuals are potential targets these days. And so everybody should have a lot more awareness on cybersecurity. With that, thank
Right.
you so
And
much for the time that you've given. It was pleasure talking to you.
likewise, sir. And whenever you are in India, I would love to host you for in future and do some offline workshops or be offline discussion panel discussions like this, sir. Thank you so
More
much.
than happy to. Thank you so much.